Teach us a lesson, historian. Teach us a lesson, this class. For we've gone from our tongues to learn history, and you are the teacher of this class.
If you want history, I'm the prof to call, cause in this big brain of mine, all knowledge is installed. A, test grades, A.
Bro, what are you even doing? Why are you rapping in class, man? You're like 58 years old, you're balding, and you have a widow's peak. You're divorced 3 times. Shush.
I was having such a great time daydreaming until the two of you had to come and ruin it. I thought we were going to have a great lecture today and you two would enjoy my class. But if this is how you want it to be, fine. We'll do it that way. For that, you both get an F.
Bro, what is your problem, man? I actually put an effort on this test.
Man, me too. Come on. Well, maybe if you had spent a little more time taking notes and spent less time listening to the lawnmower outside, you would have done better on the test. Now, let's begin today's lecture. If you remember from last class, we've been talking about the American Enlightenment. So today, we will be starting with Cicero. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, didn't he live like 1,000 years ago, like you?
You have such a great memory, Jack. You should put it to use on the next test. Yes, Cicero was a Roman, so he lived quite a bit longer before the American Enlightenment.
Then why are we even talking about him?
Well, boys, we are laying the groundwork for the American civilization. In his writings, Cicero set forth the principle of equality. He believes that the common characteristic between men, all men, and what separates them from animals is the faculty of learning and the ability for virtue.
Yeah, how is this relevant, old man?
Just wait and see, my dear student.
About 1,500 years later, during the Enlightenment, thinkers such as John Locke and Thomas Paine began emphasizing the rights of the individual, including the right to thought itself. René Descartes famously put it, cogito ergo sum, or in English, I think, therefore I am.
Haven't we already gone over this in class so many times?
Precisely. We have mentioned it 4 times, and this is the 5th. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, the Enlightenment. So, when America was liberated from England, our founding fathers created a list of amendments to go into the Constitution as soon as it was passed. Right? These are what we call the Bill of Rights. So, the very first of these Bill of Rights is the amendment protecting freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
But how does this connect to the Enlightenment?
Yes, Noah. Yes, Noah. Yes. Exactly. So, the ideas of Cicero, Locke, Paine, and Descartes are all visible here. For everyone to be equal, as they all held, everyone must have an equal right to say what they believe, just as a king would. So, this freedom, while we enjoy it today, has had issues along the way, such as journalists playing fast and loose with facts.
Yeah, welcome to the present, Boomer.
Well, Jack, as I am trying to explain at the moment, this issue goes back a lot longer than either of our lifetimes. You see, as soon as the First Amendment was passed, there began an issue: censorship. Do either of you know what that means?
No, I've never heard that word in my entire life.
Well, that's quite all right. We can learn about it together. So, author Hilary Reichman defines censorship in this way. He says, and I quote, "The removal, separation, or restricted circulation of literacy, artistic, or educational materials on the grounds that they are morally or otherwise objectionable, This is what he calls censorship. Reichman goes on in his book to explain how different groups have been censored in the American political history. One example is that of creationism being taught in the public school system.
Debunked.
Well, Jack, I personally wouldn't say that, but even if you were to believe that creationism is false, who is to decide that it should not be taught in school? Let me give you another example. Pornography. There has been a long-standing debate over this topic, whether pornography should be censored in American public life. But the United States has always had laws on obscenity. So, freedom of speech does have some limitations, and you can't say anything you could ever think of.
But I thought we had freedom of speech.
We do know, but there are some things that you cannot say that could be potentially harmful to the rights of others.
Yeah, and who's the one deciding that?
Very good question, Jack. We will get there soon, but before we get there, let's talk about Barry Goldwater.
Who?
Oh, I thought you might say that, actually. Barry Goldwater was a United States Senator who served during the Civil Rights era. He also ran for president. But something interesting about Goldwater was that he was one of only a few Republicans to vote against the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
But doesn't that make him a
Racist?
Well, not necessarily, Noah. Goldwater and others had concerns with the bill not based on race. He limits the reality of this bill in this way. He says, "It is with great sadness that I realize the non-fulfillment of these high hopes. My hopes were shattered when it became apparent that emotion and political pressure, not persuasion, not common sense, not deliberation, had become the rule of day and of the processes of this great body." So, Goldwater was able to recognize that politics in America was no longer about whose opinion won in a debate, but rather whose opinion was favored among the elites. It seemed America and its people were beginning to hold a similar views to Goldwater.
Dude was ahead of his time.
Possibly. So with Goldwater, we are starting to notice a sense of distrust brewing in the American populace against the American government. But we can also view the American public around this time becoming distrustful of the media, in large part due to the media's own failures. In 1955, CBS aired a TV show called The $64,000 Question.
Wait a minute, aren't you that old?
No, not quite, Noah. I'm not quite that old yet. After a few years on air, and an estimated 50 million viewers, journalists caught wind that the winners of the show had been rigged.
Yeah, so why does it show that people who are laying in the graveyard watch matter?
Good question, Jack. It matters because it is an example of why Americans distrust the media. Noah, can you give me a recap of where we are so far?
Americans are having a hard time trusting the government and the media.
Perfect. Before we get to the main topic of today's lecture, let's take a step back. What do we keep coming back to?
Oh, authority.
And certainty!
Perfect. You guys are listening so well today. I'm so proud of you. With this lesson, we are tackling the issue of authority. Or in other words, who should I listen to? After the American Enlightenment, the two forms of authority for Americans became the scientific method and the autonomous self. They couldn't trust the government much, nor could they trust the media, as we've shown thus far. So, are you guys tracking so far? Good. So, let's wrap this all together. So, because Americans have laws protecting equality, and they have the First Amendment protecting their freedom of speech, this gives them the ability, contrary to the lives of those under despotic rule, who can only listen to what their emperor says. Americans are able to put authority wherever they please. But most of them have chosen to put said authority in science and their own minds.
Dr. Yoder, Modich, I don't trust the science.
Exactly. That is where I wanted this conversation to go. You see, in 2020, the United States federal government shut down the country in a lockdown to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 coronavirus.
Not this again.
Oh, it's important, I promise. We've just finished talking about how Americans place authority in science and their own minds. But what happens when a man goes on the television calling himself science itself?
Yeah, good one, old man. ×2.
Jack, can you hit the lights, please? Now, listen as Dr. Anthony Fauci from the National Institute of Health calls himself science.
So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people can recognize there's a person there, so it's easy to criticize. But they're really criticizing science, because I represent science.
Now, what happens if the man who calls himself the science lies publicly?
I don't know how many times I can say it, Madam Chair. We did not fund gain-of-function research.
Anyway, so let me just go on about NIH lifts funding pause on gain-of-function research.
Do you have any sense of where it probably came from?
I think ultimately we know that these things come from an animal reservoir.
I wasn't leaning totally strongly one way or the other. I've always kept an open mind. Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
Should you be wearing 2 masks or 1 mask? I often myself wear 2 masks. Can we make a general recommendation that doesn't have scientific basis yet? No. Please, wear a mask. Well, I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I went with Dr. Birx into the president and said, 15 days are not enough. We need to go 30 days.
Right, so here we've noticed that Dr. Fauci is contradicting himself on numerous occasions. Jack, would you please hit the lights? Now, we're starting to see an issue, right? Americans are facing a crisis of authority. The people who are on the television, who have sworn under oath to protect us and tell us the right things, are lying to us.
Yeah, man, that's like what we've been dealing with for the past 3 years.
Precisely, Noah. According to Gallup, confidence in American institutions fell heavily between July 2021 and July 2022. They found that of the institutions they have been polling for Americans since 1979, all of them had dropped to an all-time low.
Yeah, these paycheck thieves are just shamelessly lying to us every day of their lives until they die.
So, this is where we stand currently as Americans. We cannot trust our institutions. We cannot trust our government. We cannot trust our media. And so, it is unclear what's about to happen, but I can tell you one thing. We are living in the middle of history. We'll just have to wait and see what comes next. Well, that's all for today's lesson. Make sure you do the reading that I have assigned, even though I won't test you on it. So have a good weekend. Goodbye, honeys.